Welcome to the Decipher podcast. I'm Dennis Fisher. I'm here at Black Hat with Raj Samani from Rapid7. Raj, thanks so much for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. So I know you guys just did some ransomware research, and it's not sort of the normal, like, let's dig in and get a few surveys and figure out like the broad strokes. Tell me some of the big findings that you guys dug out of this research that you just did.
Yeah, so within Rapid7 Labs, so that's the organization that I run, we've got obviously a vulnerability intelligence team, but we've got a threat analytics division as well. And the objective is, the latter is to understand who is doing the attacks, and the former is to understand how they are getting into organizations. So what we've done is, actually the team have developed a new dashboard, so we're actively real-time tracking leak post sites. We're correlating that against the analysis that we do of ransomware samples to give us a picture as to actually what's going on beyond the headlines, because all anybody talks about is Klopp, not the former Liverpool manager, I mean the ransomware group, the Klopp.
Nice one.
Yeah. Awesome. I don't think that joke's going to land here. Can I just be clear?
I got it.
Okay, good. So one person gets it. But beyond the headlines, actually what is really happening, and like a lot of the stats actually surprised me. So like this year alone, there's been 21 net new ransomware groups. Mostly groups that you've not heard of.
Right.
Partially because they're going after firms that, this sounds terrible, but the press, the media, the industry just seems to forget about because they're not big enough to warrant any headlines. And so, if you're generating $5 million of revenue, you have a much higher likelihood of being targeted by ransomware. And sorry, not targeted, being compromised by ransomware, because we're seeing post-exploitation. Yeah. So the report's fascinating in that it begins to give us an insight as to what's going on without the ridiculous kind of 27% of CISOs believe X, which is
believe ransomware is bad.
Yeah, exactly.
We all do.
Meaningless research, I would
Right.
call it, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, like the net new number of ransomware groups that are starting up, because obviously this business model works really, really well for cybercrime groups. And yes, the FBI and Europol and other law enforcement agencies are going after them with some success, like especially in the payment ecosystem part of it. But most of those folks are never going to see the inside of a US prison because they live in countries where we don't have extradition treaties, or the UK doesn't. So it's a growth industry inside cybercrime.
Well, and actually the problem is worse than that. You talk about the ability to be able to arrest those individuals. The ability to be able to even gather evidence in order to be able to identify what's going on is hard.
Yeah.
We are an industry that doesn't work well, doesn't play well together. We compete, we fight with one another, we flame each other on X and Twitter and whatever. And so like what's happened is things like GDPR come in, and we've completely missed the who is boat. So now if we want to get evidence or information from who is, we've got to get an MLAT if it's from a nation which we don't have it's not within our territory. So, doing an investigation has got significantly harder. But actually, and this was the really fun part. So what the team did was they actually did source code analysis of all of the variants of ransomware that we found. And they're not new. Not all of them are new.
This is what I was going to ask you. Okay.
Right. So what we did was we did source code analysis, and what happens is we've got such a significant overlap of source code between various different variants. And so they're new, but obviously this is a podcast, but in video, like I've got air quotes, yeah. They're new. So they're not necessarily all net new. And it kind of begs this question, which is, okay, so if you're borrowing or utilizing source code from other variants, this kind of tells us that we've got this fluidity within the ecosystem where they're working together, they're sharing code, or equally they're ripping each other off. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, they're new. And I think that's part of the challenge now is with the accessibility and availability of new feature sets, new source codes, and affiliates migrating from variant to variant, this issue is going to continue. And unfortunately, it's not going to get the coverage it deserves because they're going after the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah. You're right about the media not caring about the low hanging fruit. That's true. Like, I'm not going to go write a story about, some small regional bank that gets hit or an auto parts manufacturer with $4 million in revenue. because no one cares. Like,
Well, no one will read it.
No, absolutely.
No,
yeah,
no.
it's hospitals.
Yeah, so
government
it's your
agencies.
fault, listener. It's
It
not
is
our
my
fault.
fault.
No,
That's
no, no,
correct.
not your fault.
No.
It's your listener's fault.
Me specifically.
No, it's your listener's fault. They're not going to click on the link. So
No, you're right.
Are you happy with yourselves?
I love it. So how do you see this, if at all? I know you're advisor to Europol. How do you see law enforcement, if there is an end game, actually being able to break, especially the ransomware as a service model, where there's affiliates, essentially like franchisees just going and doing intrusions or buying?
Well, I mean, I think they're more than franchisees. So if you remember, like with GandCrab, so like version 5.4, we had the most prevalent form of ransomware in the world. I think it's like circa 2019. And we were able to actually identify the affiliates because they actually had unique IDs identified to the malware samples. So they knew who was compromising which company, so they could give them their commission back or their payment.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, kind of Soda Nikibi popped up, and then all of the affiliates migrated and moved over to Soda Nikibi or Reevil. So the affiliates are really, I think they're the ones that predominantly hold the majority of the power, because why else would you get 70% of the returns? And so what I suspect is happening is some of the top affiliates are the ones that are driving the largest and the biggest revenues and the successes. But what it means for organizations, and like last year, I think, like there's been some telling moments in our lives, in our industry. So 2006, we had one of the first instances of cybercrime as a service. 2009, you had the attack on Nantas, so you had ICS. I think 2023 was another one, because you saw the exploitation of a 0-day being used as an initial entry vector to get inside an organization with Move IT, and then obviously, name your O-Day, right?
Things have gone downhill since then. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you kind of think to yourself, well, hang on, these are organizations these are criminal groups that were literally guessing passwords a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got access to what is regarded as the holy grail of cybersecurity or criminal enterprise, which is an O-Day. And even more remarkable is you're willing to burn that like without any concern at all.
Yeah.
Which tells me, okay, they've now got access to an arsenal of, you see my football analogies are coming through?
I love this. Yeah. This is right up my alley.
I hate Arsenal, by the way, but like, they've now got access to an arsenal of O-Days, and they're not afraid to burn them, which tells me, well, okay, there seems to be a steady stream of this. And so what I suspect the ransomware landscape will look like is it will unfortunately continue, but we will see rapid innovation occurring all of the time. So how an organization responds to this now fundamentally has to change, and it has to change really over the last 12 months.
One of the things that's interesting to me, especially that O-Day piece of it, is, to me, that signals, I mean, we know this, that some of these ransomware groups and cybercrime groups are affiliated with, if not sponsored by, state governments, especially in say, North Korea. Russia just sort of kind of looks the other way. So I don't think that ransomware groups are doing original research to go and find O-Days. Tell me if I'm wrong, but my guess is that that's coming from somewhere else.
Well, I mean, that's the challenge is there's this asymmetry of information. So we are speculating based upon what we see.
Yes.
We suspect, we believe, they actually have access to our research. It's really funny, a few years back, a buddy of mine runs a social media risk-based company, and he analyzed my followers, and he said, did you know, I can't remember the percentage, but 15 to 20% of your followers are known botnet farms from malicious APT groups or organized crime.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
I said, oh, that's cool. How do I get more?
How can I use this to my advantage?
Yeah, how can I use this to boost my followers? But that's the reality is we're dealing in an industry where you can just walk downstairs, speak to somebody in a booth, and they will talk to you about the machine learning models that they have because they think it might be a sale. But actually, we are very transparent as an industry, and the criminal enterprises clearly are not. And so the challenge is we have to speculate based upon what we know, and what we know is based upon technical indicators. And so we do attribution, internally and also we published details on technical research. We did research on the Kimsuki APT group, affiliated with North Korea recently, around the payloads and the analysis that they do. So we're constantly trying to provide details of this. The fundamental shift that we have now is, so we launched the command platform, so it's commanding your attack surface. But what we do now is the integration of enrichment and the accessibility and availability of actionable indicators, which we also provide open source. So, I did say not a product pitch, but if you're listening to this and you're worried about, I don't know, the Move IT vulnerability, we've got artifacts to help you threat hunt freely. If you want to know what's been exfilled out your environments, we provide artifacts to tell you that. If you want to test the vulnerabilities, you have Metasploit, you have Attacker KB. So what we're trying to do is, yes, we're integrating all of the intelligence into our products and platforms, but we're also democratizing security by making it accessible to open source.
That's what I love. You mentioned Attacker Knowledge Base. If people don't know what that is, go find it. It's one of the coolest resources out there. I remember when that launched, I was like, this is great. I love it, especially me selfishly, I use it every day. Because if I'm writing about something, a bug, I want to go see not just what the Rapid7 research team thinks about it, but some outside contributor might be like, look, we saw this exploited in 4 of our customer environments. Here's how they did it. Here's what to go look for.
But, and here's what's new. So one of the things we have obviously is exploited in the wild tags.
Yeah.
So we'll tell you if it's exploited in the wild, and we now have workers that correlate against CISA's Kev list. So we'll tell you, hey, are we seeing it exploited in the wild, or is the community seeing it exploited in the wild? Is CISA confirming it as exploited in the wild vulnerability? And now, as of a few weeks back, we've now got a worker that analyzes GitHub repos to determine if there's a POC exploit available.
Oh, okay, nice.
So now you can say, is there likely to be an exploit for this? And this kind of comes back to that point, which is, with some of the region of 80 days in the last year alone, organizations cannot respond to that. It's just impossible.
Not even the most mature security organizations.
No, I mean, I will tell you, I don't think I've had a weekend off. I don't remember the last time I didn't work on a
Then how are you watching football?
Well, I support Spurs, so...
No, you don't have to watch. Really.
Honestly, I hide behind the sofa and I put my phone on and I work. I mean, it's hard. It's a hard life.
It is.
But the great thing now is you actually have the opportunity to be able to say, okay, this is a critical vulnerability. Should I sound the alarm? Mm-hmm. Well, is it being exploited in the wild? Yes or no? Okay, it is or it's not. If it's not, maybe I don't have to deal with it. Okay, is there a POC exploit available? So in other words, should I be concerned about it coming down the line? Maybe. And then we integrate that enrichment through the attack surface analysis, so then you know what vulnerabilities you have, so then you know whether you should prioritize, whether you should patch, whether you should force a change with regards to change control, because I don't even think we've got into the discussion around whether you should test before patching or anything like that. So
well, we have some pretty good evidence you probably should.
Well, yeah, but again, do you have the time anymore?
Yes. Well, that's different, yeah.
Look, yes, you can cite SolarWinds, but I'll cite you 80 days over the last year and say, so you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
You just have to make a decision, make sure that the business agree and accept that approach, acknowledge that there is a potential risk coming down the line by not testing the patches in production, and then have remediation paths and fallback plans in the event that what you've deployed ends up blue screening your environment. So you have to make a a
Right. You can't just sit there and look at the information
and say I might patch, but I don't know what to.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge, right? It is a risk-sum game, so you have to determine what level of risk you're willing to tolerate.
The good thing I think nowadays is, not just you guys, but everybody else that publishes all of this threat intelligence, for free. Obviously, there's a lot of paid services out there, but there's so much information out there now, as opposed to even 5 or 10 years ago. Organizations that were trying to make those decisions were essentially not flying blind, but there were far fewer streams of information for them to inform those decisions.
But I think it's too much though, don't you?
For me, yes, absolutely.
Because I think that's the challenge is, what's worse than having no information? Too much information.
Far too much, yeah. And then you can't make a decision, as you said.
Analysis paralysis, right? That's what you have. And so what we've tried to do, quite intentionally, like within the products, if you're not concerned, you fire and forget, we'll put detection and coverage inside our products. If you want to have context and enrichment, we have that within the platform. If you want actionable indicators, we have IOCs with all of our publications. We always make it accessible. Rapid7 Labs GitHub repo is publicly accessible. We publish our IOCs within there. We also have accessibility and availability of VQL threat hunting rules through Velociraptor. We've got an artifact exchange, which we make accessible and available. And we've got 20, 30 pages of technical analysis about these critical vulnerabilities. So what we're trying to say is threat intelligence, whilst interesting, is not actionable. But what we're saying is now we're making accessible actionable intelligence, both within the product, but also accessible and open to the open source community.
Yeah. I want to go back to the information asymmetry thing that you mentioned earlier with regard to the cybercrime ecosystem. All of the stuff that you guys are putting out and everyone else is putting out, we know through various ways that cybercrime groups read that stuff just as much as defenders do. Certainly there's cybercrime groups downstairs right now, as you said, going around talking to engineers, talking to people, seeing what they know about them and vice versa. How does that get addressed? Is there a way to, I don't see a clear solution to that, but.
No, I think there are ways and means. And so, like, for example, if we identify, for example, a flaw in the encryption, we're not going to tweet about it. Right. Like clearly. So I think and I think that's the tightrope that we walk as security professionals, is we know when to put stuff out on X, and we know when we don't put stuff out on X. And the funny thing is, I can turn around to you and say something absolutely ludicrous, and you will understand what I say. We can switch the cameras on. I can say, "Oh, that's TLP red," and you would absolutely understand what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And we live our lives through the traffic light protocols every single day. And so, yes, there are things that we do not talk about, and there are things that we openly want people to know about. And I want you to know about the retroactive threat hunting rules, and I want you to know about No More Ransom. By the way, we should have probably took that up right at the start.
Yeah, probably. It's my fault.
And we've got over 175 decryptors in No More Ransom, over $1 billion prevented. But we're not going to tell you, for example, how the decryptor works in the event that there is a flaw in the encryption algorithm that the criminals have. So I think there are ways and means for us to be able to operate. But yeah, look, the challenge I think now for organizations is integrating intelligence into your operations. Mm-hmm. Retroactive threat hunting now has to be a fundamental, just as you would deploy AV or a firewall, threat hunting now has to be a critical component of the everyday operations.
But what about the smaller organizations we were speaking about earlier that maybe, or almost certainly don't have an in-house security team? They probably have to outsource that if they do it at all.
Good. No. Look, and I think that I'm glad you say that, because the industry is responding. We have, and other firms have, MDR, for example, as a process. The challenge isn't the fact that actually there aren't products and services available. The challenge is finding the right products and services that are available. So like you can walk downstairs and almost certainly every single booth will have some sort of AI buzzword talked about it.
Yes.
Right? 2 years ago, the buzzword was threat intelligence. You remember like RSA?
I remember.
Yeah. So the question then becomes, okay, how do I determine the security efficacy of the product or solution or the service that I'm buying?
I truly don't know.
But I think there are ways and means in order to be able to ask the right questions. Yeah. So like, how, for example, we got this process internally called ETR, the Emergent Threat Response. It was designed to kind of respond to the out of the ordinary critical events.
Sure.
One a quarter. Basically what we do is we sound the alarm and everybody stops like living a life and just, we've got the team doing the analysis, team developing the exploit, for modules for Metasploit, developing detection, doing analysis for AKP. Like it is hard work. there are times when it's 3 a week.
Yeah. Times have changed. Yeah.
But the great thing is, you can actually see the output of the analysis, the research, the timeliness of the publications when content coverage is accessible and available in comparison to when the advisory becomes public. So there are ways and means for you to be able to measure the content efficacy
Yes.
of said provider. And the Data Protection Act in the UK tells you you are still held liable and responsible even if the data processor doesn't have the appropriate controls.
Ugh.
So you still have to do those checks and balances. Yeah. So you just got to ask the right questions. I mean, I'm the type of guy that goes in, buys a car, and asks the dealership about the vulnerability disclosure policy of the car that I'm buying.
I'd love to hear their answers on that.
I do it for fun. It's one of the few pleasures I have. I mean, you know my football team, so you know
Yeah,
that.
that's not pleasure.
I'm a bit of a sadist there.
Obviously, yeah. The piece you mentioned about like sort of the context and the ways and means of figuring out like, okay, there's all this information, but which parts of it matter to me specifically? That's, I think, the important part that a lot of organizations sort of like get lost in. They're looking at 50 threat intel feeds in their SOC, but not thinking specifically about like, okay, yes, we have the software, but is it even exposed to the internet? Can anybody get to it? What would be the consequences if it was exploited? Probably not, maybe it's nothing, maybe it's bad. All that stuff matters.
I mean, our CMO, Cindy, is a genius, right? And she's come out with the tagline. So we launched the command platform, and she says, command your attack surface. And I was just like, I love it. And that's what we're talking about, right? It's not a product, it's an initiative as to how you need to take control of your attack surface.
Yeah, know what it is. How do you...
Understand your risk.
Yeah.
Understand the context and the value and the prioritization of the assets that you want to protect. Make sure that you get the best content efficacy and the enrichment, and then prioritize accordingly. You are not going to be able to respond to 80 O-days over the last year, because you don't need to.
No.
You need to focus on the ones that impact you. And so, like if you remember, the big one was the progress, the Move IT issue.
Yeah.
That was big news. And for some people, it was destroyed weekends. Yeah. For others, it was stuff to scroll and read about. Yeah. And your objective is to make sure to figure out which side you're on. Are you the person that's reading it going, oh, okay, we don't use that, so I'm good.
Yeah, I'm fine today. Yeah.
Writing a little note to your executive team and the risk team saying, you've heard about X, we're good, don't worry. Oh, and by the way, we've done a scan of our environment. We've determined that there isn't somebody running it kind of outside of our purview. Yeah. We've done a retroactive threat hunt just to be doubly sure. We know we're good. That's your objective. If you can answer that question, security becomes easier.
But so many people can't answer that question, which is the big problem. I have so many friends that, move into a security role at a new organization, and 2 weeks in or 2 days in, they're like, nobody knows what we run here. They don't have any idea if we have this software package. They don't, it's all sort of a mystery. And he's like, my next 8 months is going to be doing this attack surface analysis, trying to figure out what we actually do here and what software and platforms we run.
But it's going to be more than your next 8 months. It's going to be your perpetual struggle for life, right? That is what we do. Like, you can't protect what you don't know. And so, like, back to the point is you have to command your attack surface. You have to understand what you have, what's coming, and then you can start to then prioritize and start to do retroactive hunting and stuff like that. And that is exciting. Like that to me is the best part, because you can then have a meaningful discussion with leadership. So a few years back, I got called into an incident, and it was a really large firm, and they were like, we got popped and it's your fault. It's usually, right? It's always somebody's fault. So I was like, okay, well, let's have a look at it. And we did the analysis, and it determined that there was a APT group from Southeast Asia that had been inside their environment for 7 years.
Oh.
Yeah. So I was like, well, you are aware that, this is 7 years. And they're like, okay. But we were able to contextualize it. And the reason that we were able to determine it's 7 years, because the threat actor didn't clean up behind themselves, because they're like, this place is a mess. We don't need
Yeah, we don't need to bother. Yeah.
We even found the staging server that was being used for the exfiltration of data. So we knew what had been stolen. And the irony is they didn't clean up after themselves. So we were like, hey, over the last 7 years, this is what's been stolen. But the really great part was we were able to provide meaningful context to the CEO. So we got involved with the CEO and we were able to say, okay, there is this threat group and we know that it's this threat group based upon these indicators and we have this level of confidence in STEM. Right, so we're being targeted by a nation state, right. This is what they have stolen. Okay, and so now all of a sudden we were able to contextualize. And being able to have that meaningful discussion back to the board and to the CEO meant that actually security for once was actually top priority within the organization. Yeah. Now, of course.
For how long?
Well,
yeah.
The funny thing was they were like, oh, okay, when this is over, Raj, what do you recommend we do? It's like these things. And then when it was over, it's like, yep, thanks, bye. Yeah. It's like, all right.
Sorry, we don't have budget for that stuff. Yeah.
I'll speak to you in 6 months then.
I mean, there's a different APT that's been in there. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing, like, you know, APT groups, you know, they're not necessarily burning O days. They're using dual use tools in the environment.
Yeah.
Ransomware groups don't need to burn O days. They're doing, you know, they can use they can go to an RDP shop and, you know, acquire credentials for like $5.
Yes.
But the fact is they can now. And so
yeah.
we now have to kind of respond as an industry as to how we deal with that. And what we're trying to do at Rapid7 Labs, what we're trying to do at Rapid7 wholly is, okay, from a product perspective, driving security efficacy, but equally we understand that actually open source is kind of the heart of what we do. And so like making all of that stuff accessible and available is the intent.
I really think that's important because there's so many large software providers, technology companies, security companies that have all this cool stuff, really great information. It never sees the light of day. Or if it does, it's as a paid service where you're going to pay $100K a quarter to see that feed. And if you're trying to, if what we're doing at a base level is trying to protect more people, that's not helpful. It's helpful to put information out there that everyone can get to.
Look, I used to be a CISO, and I've dealt with my fair share of incidents. I've firsthand seen the impact that WannaCry had on the National Health Service. You know, I've been involved in cases where it's impacted medical coverage. Like I've actually seen that. It's affected my, you know, my father-in-law, right? Because he was in hospital at the time. He was, and so I've seen the impact it has. You know, we've read about ransomware cases where people are unable to work because the business has kind of had to kind of go on a hiatus because of a ransomware attack. Yeah. And I think like we dehumanize the story because we don't have the time to kind of go, hey, what was the impact of that ransomware attack? Or what was the impact of, we did a study once on, you know, trying to understand the cost of intellectual property, but there is opportunity costs associated with that. And so, you know, collectively, we dehumanize the issue. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we have as an industry is we don't, like today we're dealing with, you know, we were talking earlier about the riots in the UK, driven through misinformation on a platform that we leverage and utilize each and every single day. You know, we can talk about the elections or Brexit and all of these things happening, but like cybersecurity for me is the most important topic of our society. It impacts every single element of our life, what we think about, how we make friends, how we take care of one another, how we provide medical care. I mean, if a doctor can get access to your medical records digitally at the point of when they need treatment, you will receive better treatment.
Right.
And there are people out there and individuals out there intentionally trying to disrupt that. Like that, we never talk about this. We're focused on which product has AI or not. And so like, I think for me personally, like the reason that I've come to Rapid7 is because actually there is that commitment towards open source. There is that commitment to kind of saying, okay, we have things like Metasploit, and Metasploit's awesome, right?
Metasploit's incredible.
It is awesome, right? And so like, we provide training and material and content. Like Spencer is here this week and at DEF CON providing training for Metasploit. So like if you're here in Vegas, you should be going to Spencer's talk because you will walk out of there with skills and knowledge that can help you not only in your career, but also protect the systems you're employed to protect. So yeah, I just hope that we as an industry can kind of realize and acknowledge our role in shaping the future of our society.
The human part of it to me is one of the most fascinating parts of what we all do. Because yeah, the technical stuff is cool and yeah, people can do tricks with computers, whatever. What's interesting to me is the impact that these things can have, interesting in sort of a, intellectual way. It's a lot of times horrifying, as you just described, with the impact on the National Health Service and other things. But at some level, you have to wake up every morning thinking, all right, look, what I do matters because of this.
But let me ask you though, so of all of the stories that you've run, of all of the podcasts that you've run, how many cases and incidents that you know about have we been able to quantify the impact?
Oh, the percentage is so low.
There was TJX, right? That had a number.
TJX was probably the first one I can remember, and that was quite a while ago.
And that was a big number, right?
It was a huge number.
Then there was the health service in Ireland, right? That was quantified, but we don't quantify the impact. And so therefore, if we don't quantify the impact, then how can we determine the level of investments required from a society perspective?
Yeah.
I think Kamala Harris is here for DEF CON, I believe.
I believe so, yeah.
So, that is a phenomenal message, but the right people need to have that conversation to say, hey, look, because there was a study done a while back quantifying the impact of GDP that cybercrime has. And so we know that cybercrime has an impact to GDP, ergo the economic growth of a nation.
Right.
So if we can start to quantify that better by being more open and transparent about the incidents and the impacts that it has, then we can quantify the impact, and therefore we can then get policymakers to provide the necessary investment we need.
Yeah. The dollar figure always matters, especially for policymakers, and, anybody else making decisions about security buying or anything like that. If you can show the board or your CEO, like, this is the potential effect from, if you say no to this, or.
Yeah, but also I think the other thing we should be thinking of is not just, hey, here's the potential impact if we don't do something, but here's the potential growth opportunity if we do things in the right way. And if you look in oil and gas, the deployment of things like digital oil fields, increasing oil production, through using digital systems is a phenomenal example of where you're using technology to drive innovation with security integrated at the heart of what they do. And that, if we have more use cases like that, then all of a sudden security doesn't become the poor cousin of the board. It becomes integral to the growth of an organization, because technology has transformed every business. Yeah,
it's true. All right, Raj, thanks so much for your time, man.
No,
I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sorry about Tottenham. Thanks for
Me too.
Thanks for coming, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.